Hello, welcome everyone. Hello, my name is Teresa Bettman and I use she and her pronouns and I'm on the training team here at Propel Nonprofits in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's webinar titled Scenario Planning for Nonprofits. My role today will be your producer, which means I'm here to help make everything run smoothly. And I'll be sharing various resources in the chat today. So I hope you have that chat box opened. I know that all those resources will be sent to you later after the webinar along with the recording. And know that you can reach out to me if you have any logistical or tech questions along the way. So before we get diving into the content today, I do just want to share a little bit about Propel Nonprofits in case we are new to you or you need a quick refresher. Propel Nonprofits, as I mentioned, is based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We are a 501c3 and a community development financial institution, or a CDFI. We are champions of nonprofits here at Propel. We provide capacity building services and access to capital to support nonprofits in the areas of finance, governance, and strategy. And I'll be sharing some links about Propel and our services and programs momentarily. Okay, I don't want to take any more time because I want to hand it over to our trainer today, Sarah Jackson, to introduce herself and get us started on the scenario planning webinar.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Teresa and Elizabeth, for being with me today as we present our webinar on scenario planning. As Teresa mentioned, my name is Sarah Jackson. I use she and her pronouns. I'm the portfolio director of the loan fund here at Propel. And I also have worked my entire career in nonprofit organizations. So I was an executive director during the Great Recession around 2008. I worked at Propel through the pandemic and have had kind of a front row seat to a lot of situations that might prompt us to consider scenario planning as an option. And so I'm excited to share with you today how Propel thinks about scenario planning. So here is where we're headed during our hour together. As Teresa said, we've got a lot of content in 1 hour, so we're going to get to as much as we can during our time. We're going to spend a little bit of time right off the bat understanding what scenario planning is and what it isn't. We are going to spend the bulk of our time talking through Propel's approach to scenario planning. And then we're also going to provide a lot of questions that guide this process. So as we're preparing for this webinar and creating some resources, we often find that there's a lot of questions and you're going to be the ones that come up with the answers, but we hope to provide you with some fodder for conversation as you approach scenario planning in your organization as well. And then, of course, we always love to have a great resource here at Propel. So we will have some resources and tools to share with you as we walk through this content together as well. So you will be able to go home with a digital goodie bag of things. So let's dive right in and talk about what you're all here to hear about today, and that is scenario planning. So as nonprofit leaders, we have really learned to build budgets and forecasts and plan well for normal times. It's something that we do every year, we get really good at. But for many of us in the nonprofit sector, our new normal is this constant state of uncertainty. And so what should we do at a time like this? It's maybe a little bit unclear because our future feels a little bit unclear. And so scenario planning or scenario budgeting is a process of trying to grapple with the questions of uncertainties. It's something that we can use to explore some possible paths. And so I think the reality many of us are facing today is that the assumptions we used 6 to 8 months ago to build a budget, to build a plan for the period ahead of us may no longer be accurate. And so scenario planning gives us the option, or gives us a few options to deal with uncertainty in maybe a bit more constructive manner. So essentially what we want to do is move from constantly just asking what if, to having a few plans in our back pocket to answer that question. We will do something if this happens. And so we know that uncertainty is sort of a constant right now, But what we can do is, we can try some things. We can put together a few plans that we could move forward with if we need to. And so I think that this kind of moves us from a state of kind of paralysis and like we're not sure what to do to spending some energy kind of figuring out where we are and where we could go together as an organization. And so that is what we're going to talk about today. So at the very basic level, what is scenario planning? Scenario planning is a process that creates a framework for the what if questions and brings some order to exploration, investigation, and action. So we are going to talk through a multi-step process today that is going to help us kind of figure out where we are, where we're going, and what are a few different options if the path twists a bit, right? It's also important to talk about what scenario planning is not. So scenario planning is not a fully developed budget. A fully developed budget is going to be a key tool that we use in creating our scenario plan. It's going to be the basis for some of the financial work that we'll do, but it's not going to be a full budget process. It's also not a full like strategic planning process. So we're certainly going to ask a lot of strategic questions and do kind of like a exploration of the landscape we're in right now, but it is not a strategic plan. This is really going to give us a few options to move forward during a time or a period of uncertainty, but it's not going to be a 3 to 5 year long range plan necessarily. A scenario plan is also not a benchmark for success. So I think we often come to a process like this in a moment of crisis or, kind of a reactionary period. And we come up with our best case scenario and our worst case scenario, or maybe like the absolute worst and like the most possible worst scenario you could think of. And some of us might be doing that right now, right? But we also don't want to kind of label, we don't need to put like a value on that, right? We can make option A, B, and C. We can come up with our expected, our unexpected. There's different ways we can think and talk about scenario planning. And it's also not a one-time process. So this is, if you've been engaged in our cash flow planning trainings before, you know that it's not a one-time deal. It's something where we need to kind of keep the thumb on the pulse of what's going on around us and make changes as we learn more information. I also just wanted to kind of add that scenario planning can be an opportunity for us to think differently. So many of us come to scenario planning because we're forced to. It's a reactive process that we have to take part in because an external event happened. Our funding got canceled. We need to figure out how to keep moving forward, right? But you may be in a position today where you are in a seat where you can be a bit more proactive with your scenario planning. So you can be a bit more aspirational or strategic or innovative with your scenario plans. And so even if you are coming to this work from a reactive place, think about the ways that you can bring a proactive mindset to this process. And I think that can be just help it be a little bit more holistic, friendlier process that you'll move through. Okay, so now we are going to talk through the way that Propel thinks about scenario planning. So this is really the way that we approach scenario planning with our clients. We have a very multidisciplinary team here at Propel. We have folks with accounting and finance backgrounds. We have our strategic services colleagues. We have our training colleagues. We have our lending colleagues. And so we have kind of braided together all of that knowledge into this process. A couple things that I want to mention just, as we move into the rest of our time together is that, we have an hour here together today. And so we're not going to give you every single bit of a plan. You're maybe not going to leave completely ready to start your own scenario plan, but this is going to give you a really great overview of the process and what to expect. And with that, I want to mention that, if you are you're already on this journey in your organization, or, this is something that you're considering, one of the great tools that Propel has right now is office hours. So once a month, we have an opportunity for nonprofits to sign up for an hour, either in person or virtual, to come talk to one of us. So we have a bunch of our colleagues here at Propel lined up and ready to sit down and chat with you. Maybe you want to look at a few scenarios, maybe you want to talk about your approach, but those officers are a great time to engage with Propel and kind of have some more one-on-one time than we do today in this webinar setting. So our next office hours are next Tuesday, the 12th, I believe is the date. And we'll have a slide at the end of the show where you can use a QR code to sign up. I'm sure that Teresa will also share the link in our chat box as well to sign up. So just wanted to kind of give you that level set as we move into the process together. Now, it wouldn't be a Propel training without a beautiful case study. So we are going to walk through the steps of scenario planning today, but we're also going to talk about it through sort of the lens of a nonprofit case study. So the organization that we'll be looking at today is called the Mental Health Advocacy Network. This is an organization that we have made up, so it's not based on an actual organization. But some key things to know about this organization is that it's a health and human services organization that provides mental health awareness services and connects members of the community with government programs. It does have a bit of government funding as part of its budget of $1.2 million. They currently have 9 staff members, including an executive director who is also sort of playing the role of finance director, as well as an outsourced accounting group. They have a part-time grant writer who is writing grants and contract applications, but they also have a development director who's really working on individual donor relationships and foundation relationships. So that's kind of the organization that we'll be thinking about today as we walk through these 5 steps of scenario planning. Okay, so let's move into step 1. And I think that this step is very important because I don't know about you, but since I would say mid-January, the thing that I've been hearing most is like scenario planning. You got to do scenario planning. We're interested in doing scenario planning. Our board said we have to do scenario planning. And so I think the very most important and first question to ask is why? Why are we doing this? Let's identify our motivations for engaging in the process of scenario planning. So the first thing we should ask, like I said, is why are we doing this work? What is happening right now that makes us think that we need to build some plans that are different than our original plan, right? Maybe that's our original budget or kind of the vision and direction of the organization with a strategic plan, right? This might mean that we need to say some hard things out loud, but it also helps us kind of get all that out on the table. We also don't want to do this alone. So I really don't think that one person can do the work of scenario planning alone. In an ideal situation, you're going to want some financial leaders, maybe from your board, your treasurer. You're going to want some board members, some senior staff or staff members involved in this conversation. Maybe if you have, for example, an outsourced accountant, that would be helpful support as well. But you want to be able to bring in sort of a diversity of opinions and thoughts and experiences and just folks that are out doing different things in community as well. You also want to get curious about the situation and the motivation. So, really, interrogate why are we doing this at this time? And here's some helpful questions to kind of consider. So, what are the issues out around us in our organization or external that are prompting us to consider engaging in the work of scenario planning? Are there specific problems that we're trying to solve through scenario planning, and what are those? Who is requesting us to do scenario planning, and what are their goals or motivations? Is there an external consultant telling you need to do scenario planning and they can do it for you for a cost, right? Or is it, the loss of funding or, the change in some sort of landscape that you're working in that's prompting you? And then are there certain threats or opportunities that you want to explore further by going through this process? So let's take a look at sort of how the Mental Health Advocacy Network approached these questions. So they recognize that in the current environment, their government and foundation support was at risk. So their funding could potentially change in a really meaningful way from when they did their budgets and work plans at the beginning of the year. The Finance Committee of the Board of Directors asked the Executive Director to put together some contingency plans to address a loss of funding. And so in response, the Executive Director created a team to engage in scenario planning that included the board chair, the treasurer, the Executive Director, as well as the development director and the program director. So there was some program staff, some fundraising staff, some finance staff, a nice mix of people from both the board and the staff involved in these conversations. Now, the other thing I want to mention is that depending on your level of urgency in this process, so I know that it has been the case recently that, sometimes we log into our funding portal and it's gone, or the funding has disappeared. And so that really creates like an urgent situation where we need to react quickly and figure out a path forward. So that kind of scenario planning might look a little bit different than a process where we have maybe 6 months lead time to make these considerations. And so this can be kind of a work-intensive process. If it's urgent, if it's quick, you're going to have to put all hands on deck and do the work immediately. Or if you have a bit of runway, this will be a task that you'll engage with regularly. Maybe it's once or twice a week for a few months, or something of that nature. So it requires someone beyond yourself, and it requires a commitment of time to really do this work. Okay, so in step one, we identified why we're here and why we're going to engage in the process and decided to move forward. Now what we're going to do is analyze the current environment. So we are going to gather some data to back up the feelings that we're having. So what does that mean? We want to really keenly understand what is happening around us. We are going to gather some financial data. So one of a really helpful tool is to collect our cash flow projection. If that is a tool we use and something that's up to date, that is going to tell us, given our current understanding of our operations, how much money is coming into the organization and when, and how much money are we going to be spending or going out of the organization and when. This will give us a feel for kind of a level of urgency as well. Are we running out of cash? Do we have runway? Like what are we looking at when we see our cash flow projection? We're also going to want to look at our current budget and any reforecasting that has already been done. So if you are approaching this project and you are an organization that has a December 31st year end, for example, you're eking towards the fourth quarter already. So there's a chance that you have been operating, you have updated financials, you understand how your budget is already performing in the context of this year. You're also going to want to collect any sort of funding notices, right? Do you have you heard from any funders that they are continuing funding or stopping funding or changing what they support? Have you been in touch with grant managers and things like that? Any data that you can collect right now to kind of assess the current moment is really helpful. Another thing that can be really helpful for us in analyzing the current environment is to do something like a SWOT analysis. And so this is where we take some time to really think about the internal and external factors that are affecting us and our work right now. So in a SWOT analysis, we look at our strengths. So these would be internal factors that give our organization an advantage, and also weaknesses. And this is, again, internal facing factors that put our organization at a disadvantage. Then we also want to take some time to consider the opportunities that we face. So these are external factors that could be a benefit to us, as well as threats, external factors that could harm our organization. And I think many of us come to the work of scenario planning really keyed in on the threats, but we also need to remember that we have strengths and opportunities, and also potentially maybe some weaknesses internally that could affect our ability to respond to the challenge before us. So what does this look like in practice? You may get together with a group of folks, that scenario planning group that you're working with. I've done this work in a big room with flip charts all over, right? And doing some group brainstorming together about what these different categories we're looking at. But we can think about it from all these different perspectives. So from a client need perspective, are we seeing an increased need for our services, or is our demand decreasing? How is the political climate affecting our work? Do we have federal funding? Are there executive orders that are concerning or may affect our work or our mission? Are there concerns in your organization or like the community you serve about immigration enforcement, for example? Then we think about the board. How is the board engaged? Are they kind of keyed into the moment that you're facing? What is their risk tolerance? Do they have a high risk tolerance, or is it a very conservative group of folks? Do they understand the issues that are going on right now? And do they really understand the business model of the organization? That's an important question, I think, at this time. We ask the same questions about the staff. How are they doing? Are they burnt out? Are they excited? Are they ready to take on a challenge? Or they're checking out, right? Then moving on to some important money questions. Cash on hand. Do you have cash right now? Do you have some sort of reserve fund that might be able to support you through some sort of downturn if that is one of the threats you're facing? What do your assets look like? Do you own a building? How is that going? How does that affect your operation? Liabilities, what do you owe other folks? Are you already getting behind on bills or payments? Do you have a huge mortgage? What does that look like? And I mentioned it before, this business model, but it is really important for us to understand our business models in the sense that at a time where we might be thinking about changes we could make or adjustments we could make to move forward, we really want to understand how we're bringing money into the organization, how we're spending it, how much our programs cost, all those elements of our business model. And then the last kind of things that you could consider are really relationship-based. So how are our funder relationships? Do we have regular contact with our grant managers, for example? Do we stay in regular touch with our individual donors? Are we working on that? What's that kind of like? And how is our reputation in the community? So that is an important question. I think that thinking about many of the things that have just been happening in like our state legislature, for example, there's a lot of talk of waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think that nonprofits generally get wrapped into some of those discussions. And so it is important to kind of like take stock of like how is your community, your immediate community, the folks you serve, how are they viewing you and your work at this moment? Okay, so we are going to take a look at how the Mental Health Advocacy Network approached this step number 2 of analyzing their current environment. So they did many of the things we just talked about. They collected their up-to-date financials compared to budget, their cash flow projections, and had a really solid understanding of their current financial position. The executive director also consulted with other nonprofit directors. They had a weekly call set up for the last few months with other executive directors, really kind of keeping their thumbs on the pulses of what was going on. They also took time to meet with their government contract managers and foundation program officers to understand kind of what is really happening at this moment. The organization also hosted webinars by the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, to stay up on current trends in their specific sector in mental health. And they also convened that big group of folks from both the board and the staff to review the business model and also complete that SWOT analysis that we walked through together. Okay, so this brings us to step number 3. So we identified our motivation, we understand why we're here and what we're doing. We've taken some time to really put some data behind those feelings and understand the current environment. And now we're going to take some time to think about the possible scenarios that we may develop, right? We're going to get creative about the different ways that we can respond to this moment. So I want to, one thing I just want to mention about step number 3 is that this is where we do the work of identifying possible scenarios. So this might come out directly, some ideation from your SWOT analysis. You really want to get a lot of ideas out on the table or the flip chart. But you're probably going to have a lot of ideas when you get to this point of how you can approach some of the challenges or opportunities before you. But what we really want to do in this step, after we get all those great ideas out, is to narrow it down to about 3, max of 3. Because this is in the next step, we're really going to have to we're going to have to build real plans that we might actually do for these. And it's just not feasible to plan for 100 scenarios. So that is a really important thing to just kind of remember as a step. And you can't do it all, right? So here are some ideas, right? These are some potential scenarios that we might approach in this work. So maybe our organization decides that one of our scenarios can just be staying the course. We know the kind of volatility of the moment. We understand what's before us, but like we're just gonna kind of hang steady and see what happens. That's a potential option. One of the options that we might come to is to scale down or restructure our operations. Maybe we are at a point where we're seeing a decreased need for our services, and so that lends itself to maybe scaling back. We may also be seeing a huge demand or increase for our services, and so one of our scenarios could be, how do we increase that work as well? A few other options you could explore are to look into strategic alliances or partnerships. If there are other folks that are doing similar work as you, are there ways that you could strategically work together to continue to provide those services for the community or not? And then finally, some of our scenario planning discussions ultimately point toward a merger or acquisition as a possible feasible answer, a way forward, or to sunset or dissolve the organization. If your funding sources truly do disappear, it's often not possible to continue operating in the way that you have. And so although that is like a very, very difficult discussion, it may be one of the options that you have to approach through this process. So how did the Mental Health Advocacy Network approach this? So again, after a big ideation session, kind of like understanding all of the current environment, the SWOT analysis, these are the 3 scenarios that we decided to really spend some time digging into further. So in scenario 1, we are planning for a loss of 1 foundation grant and a decrease in individual donors, because one of the trends that we saw in our analysis was that individual donor activity was just slowing down. There's just a lot of requests right now for support, and we were feeling that. So what that would mean overall for our organization, after kind of analyzing the budget numbers real quick, is about a 5% decrease in income. The second scenario is one where we lose a full government grant that supports a program, and we continue to see that decrease in individual donor trend. So again, once we run the numbers kind of through the budget, we see that that would really mean a 30% decrease in our overall income in our organization. And then finally, in scenario 3, we're exploring what would look like if we lost a city contract. So again, that earned revenue stream, and lose a foundation grant. And again, budget tells us that that would be about 11% decrease in income for the organization. So these are the 3 scenarios that we have come up with for this organization, and that we're going to move forward with creating a plan, right? So here we are. We've already moved through the first step of identifying our motivation. We really have a keen understanding of the current environment. We've determined those possible scenarios. We've narrowed it down to 3. And now we're going to do the hard work of developing the scenarios. So when we were prepping this slide, what I really wanted here was like an image of like you have your ideation session in one side, and then like all this like activity happens in the middle, and like boom, you have a scenario plan. Unfortunately, this step, or maybe fortunately, this is the hard work, I think, of scenario planning. So we are now going to take the time to put some real data into the scenarios we've developed. And I think it's really important in this step to not get stuck at aiming for perfection, because the reality of the situation is that none of us can really see the future, right? We don't know what's actually going to happen, but we can prepare for our best guess. And so don't get stuck in that like paralysis of like not being able to do anything. Just do something, right? Start moving into this work together. The other thing to remind you of at this moment is that you know your business better than anyone else. You understand your business model in and out. You understand the board and the environment you're in right now. And so as you lead this work, you are the person to do this. You can do it. I know it maybe feels a bit daunting, but you're the right person for the job. Okay, so what are some tools that we might need for this part of the process? So a cash flow projection is invaluable, I think. This is especially useful for short-term planning. So if you are in one of those situations where you're facing an urgent situation, doing your, kind of running the numbers in your cash flow projection might be the best option for you. Especially if that is a tool that you have up to date, right? You can see the immediate impact of revenue and expense changes. You can basically just, remove lines from your cash flow projection and see what happens, right? Can you still cash flow the operation? How long can you? How much time do we have? It allows us to kind of tinker in the details with using a cash flow projection. The next option would be to kind of start with your budget. And I will also say that I think a mixture of all three of these tools is really helpful. I don't think you can get by with just one necessarily, but I would say these are the key financial tools that you have. And a budget is the next one. So you're usually really familiar and comfortable with the different categories. You really understand the numbers, and you can use your budget and just kind of do a file save as scenario 1, file save as scenario 2. So don't think that you need something super fancy to engage in this work. You can use the tools that you already have. The third tool that I'll mention is a scenario planning template. And this is a template that we've created that Teresa has already shared in the chat. And this is a way for us to kind of develop some income and expense scenarios, but it also has a nice overview page that you can share with some of your stakeholders. So I'm actually going to take some time to show that to you now. So as we think about the Mental Health Advocacy Network, we're going to take a look at what their scenario planning template actually looked like. So I'm going to share my spreadsheet with you here. There we go. Okay, so here's what we have. I'm going to just start at the beginning of this spreadsheet and show you. So there are two formats of this on our website, and I believe that Teresa shared. One is blank, so you can begin to plug in your numbers whenever you'd like. The other does have this case study within it. So if you need some inspiration or to kind of spend some time looking through one that's already been completed, we also have this example here for you as well. So this first tab is the instructions, and this basically gives you an overview of kind of what each of the tabs will do. It tells you, gives you a little guide on where to input data and where you might see some formulas that are automatically going to do some math for you. And so that's where you can start. And then we have space for 3 different scenarios in this document. What I'm going to do during our time together here is to focus on that second scenario that we talked about. So this is where the Mental Health Advocacy Network loses one of its government grants and also sees a decrease in individual donors. So let's take a look at what that does to the organization. So here we come to our income scenario 2. So what we have here is this setup, kind of like you would lay out a budget, right? You can come in here and plug in your different types of funding to this here in the original budget column. And then what we're going to kind of tinker with the numbers is this estimated likelihood column here. So in our first scenario, we are predicting that our foundation support is going to stay intact. So we have a $100,000 grant, a $45,000 grant. We're keeping those in at 100%. We don't expect those to change. We also have some program grants that we don't expect to change. Now, the changes are going to come in here through our individual contributions. So we have really seen a trend of slowing down in the individual donations category. And so to be extra conservative at a moment where we're making these plans for, some uncertainty, we're going to actually reduce the level of small dollar donors that we expect to have. So when we originally made this budget, we expected just under $25,000 to come in through individual budgets. We're going to change that to we don't think about 40% of those are going to show up. So we gave it a 61% likelihood. What that did when I changed that percentage was basically move our sorry, I just pointed at my screen. You can't see that. We changed that 24,750 number to, oops, here we go, 61%. Oh my goodness. Sorry, guys. Here we go. We changed this to a 61% likelihood of receiving all that money. So basically what this spits out for us is 61% of that original number. Okay, so we have seen our budget adjust in one of these categories in individual contributions from 34,750 down to 25,000-ish. The other area where we're going to see some change in this scenario is through our state government funding. So right now we have this $345,000 grant in our budget and we are zeroing it out because the contract was canceled. And that is really the key to what we need to plan around right now. And so instead of having that $345,000 in our government funding budget, we have zero. Okay, and then we have a little bit of other income over here. So what do we see on the bottom here? We have what our total income was in our original budget was just about $1.2 million. And now we have a budget of just over $830,000. So that is a change of just over $350,000 or about 30% of our total budget, okay? So obviously in the background, you're doing some calculations, some conversations about how you should plug these in. Like if you find out obviously that a contract is canceled, it's pretty easy to zero it out. But this is also where you have to do some guesswork, right? Like maybe you think that this $100,000 grant is going to get cut in half next year. And so that's part of your plan, right? So this tool allows you, again, just like you might in a budget, to kind of play with the numbers and see what the effects are. We're going to do the same thing for expenses here. So we know that we're losing over $350,000 of funding. So what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to reduce some expenses. And this is where we kind of like dig into figuring out the details of making this work. If we are going to essentially eliminate a program in our organization, what does that mean for our, our salaries and wages, our staff, our different program expenses? And so we went through the process of figuring that out. We moved our program director and our executive director to a 0.75 instead of keeping them at full time. We wanted them to keep their benefits, but we don't need all of their hours anymore given this change. So that reduces our expenses by $30,000 with the executive director and $23,750 with the program director. We also are getting rid of a program coordinator and a program staff because we don't have that program anymore. We don't need that staffing. And then we also reduce the time of some of our other staffers as well, including our operations manager and our development coordinator. So just to be clear, like what this represents is a reduction in our staffing levels. And that is a very difficult decision for us to come to. It happens in our organizations, but it is the the quickest way to make the largest impact on our expense budgets is to eliminate positions. And it made sense in this case because we had to eliminate a whole program. And so we did not need that program staff to continue forward. We were also able to, reduce some benefits expenses and some supply expenses, other things associated with that, the program, as well as reduce the time of our contract bookkeeping because we don't have that big contract to follow anymore. So the sort of grand total changes in this are we moved from a budget of 95,000, or we moved from a budget of $1.15 million down to a budget of $846,000. So what we did was remove $312,000 some dollars of expenses from our budget, or about 27%. So what does that mean when we kind of like add it all up? So this is a great little scenario. I like these parts of this template because we can do a quick summary. So these percentages automatically calculate for you, but this is a great thing to kind of begin the discussion with your board or your finance committee. So in this second scenario, we see our income change by 29.8%, and this is our total income. Then we see our expenses change by 312,000. This is our total expenses. And so what we find here is that in this scenario, we will have an $11,000 deficit overall in our operations. And so this gives us a lot of information, right? This helps us understand the loss of funding we face. It helps us understand adjustments we can make to also ratchet down our expenses in response to that loss of income. But what it also kind of brings up the question to our board and our finance committee is, what will we do with that last $12,000? Do we have cash on hand to fund that deficit? Is there, are we at risk of becoming insolvent? This is like, the next step of the conversation really is like, okay, so we did it. What happens next? What we also have here is some space to put some narrative with the changes we're making, because we know that not all of our board members and staff members want to just see the numbers. They also want to hear, they want to understand what changes are being made. So here we talk about our program impact is that we have a reduction in one program and those staff are released. Our executive director and other senior leaders take a reduction in pay and move to a 0.75 or 0.5 since there is less work to do. So that is the programmatic impact. And then kind of from if you move up a level and think about what is the overall organizational impact of this scenario. So because we will have an impact in our staffing, we're likely to see the capacity change of our remaining staff. We might lose staff more frequently. And since we are reducing the time of our executive director, we need to understand that we might lose the executive director too at some point. And so that is a future that we'll have to plan for. We will be able to use our reserve fund to cover the deficit though. But likely if we want to continue an operation, would have to have more cuts next year. So this is kind of like the real impact of what happens.
Sarah, can I jump in to ask you a question?
Please.
One of the questions that we have is that, like, what are the numbers that you start with? Do you start with your budget? Do you start with like your actuals? How do you play with this scenario?
Yeah, that's a great question. So from a practical standpoint, I think it depends on like where you are in the year. So if you are, let's say you are at that moment where you're maybe 3/4 of the way through your year, this might be you're using your forecasted numbers, you're using the place you're starting from is like where you are right now, your current financial position. If you, for example, had a June 30th fiscal year end and you're just entering your new fiscal year, you could use the budget as your sort of starting point because you haven't done that much activity, right? You have 2 months 1.5 months of activity done. And so that would allow you the opportunity to use those numbers you just developed. But I think it's really kind of considering what your, for example, if you look at your cash flow projection and you kind of get a feel for what is your monthly run rate, how much are you spending or bringing in each month? And that is kind of like the starting point for like the what do you look like moving forward? I think a cash flow projection is super helpful in this situation because it does give you a clear position of like where you are right now with your unrestricted operating cash.
If you were looking forward towards like next year's budget and planning for next year's budget, would you like make a budget and then put it in the scenario planning template, or would you like use this year's and like tinker with it to make that scenario plan? How would you like, if you were using this to plan for a future budget, what would that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have had clients that have used this to kind of create budget ABC for the year. I think that, again, this goes back, and this might be an unsatisfying answer, but back to personal preference, right? If you have a really solid budget process and you have a series of spreadsheets or documentation that really works for you, you can start with those numbers. Maybe they're rolled up a little bit into departments or programs, whatever you're most comfortable with. If it's looking at all of the line items and picking and choosing and maybe creating it's really just how you want to piece together the numbers, I think. And so if I were doing it, I would probably create a budget, like kind of like a master budget, and then begin to plug it into the scenario planning tool, because it's a little less detailed, the scenario planning tool is, than my actual budget.
Thanks, Sarah.
So the last thing I just want to show you here in the scenario planning tool is this last tab, which is our scenario planning summary. So this document, this page, is a really helpful tool for having the conversation that will come in step 5 with your board about the different scenarios and approving them and like understanding them. So this gives us a quick snapshot of each of the 3 scenarios that we took time to build out. And then this can be where we begin the conversation with our board or other stakeholders. Or maybe this is a tool you want to share with, with funders or with clients or something like that. Like, this is how we plan to respond to the challenge ahead. This is what we're doing. And a lot of this is just, this is all being pulled in from the 3 scenarios that you worked on. And this is our summary page. Okay, so that is a quick journey through our scenario planning template, which we hope would be helpful to you. I'm going to go back over to my PowerPoint and we will look at our final step. So here we go. So we have moved through most of this process so far. We have identified our motivation, our why for doing the process. We have a good understanding of our current environment and maybe the challenges and opportunities we're facing. We've developed a few scenarios. We've narrowed it down to a few that we want to develop fully in step number 4, where we put the numbers behind the ideas. And now we're going to kind of move into action. We're moving into the final step here. And what does that mean? So what we really want to do is kind of understand what are the different indicators that we will see that will prompt us to put the plan into action. So in our example number 2, for example, we had a contract canceled. And so that was the action that happened that caused us to move into this scenario, right? So the board and the staff or your scenario planning group needs to kind of figure out what are the indicators that would cause us to move to action. One case might be like, we have been applying for this huge pie in the sky grant for years and years and years, and we finally get the letter that we've received it. That could also be reason to put a scenario into action, right? So these are just things to think about. At the same time, we also want to understand the authority. Who has the authority to make decisions? Does the board sign off on your scenario planning summary? They understand sort of where you're headed and agree with your indicators for putting the plan into action, but the executive director can do that when they're ready. Or is this something that the board needs to get together and have a phone call on and like discuss before we move into the action, right? We also, I think, need to talk about as we enter this activity or this mindset of scenario planning, we're often keenly aware of the different kind of threats and opportunities that are before us. And so in the time before we necessarily like press play on one of our scenarios, we can also take some time to explore different strategies to mitigate the possible impact of changes that would happen to us. So this might mean that we spend some time or move some staff attention to applying for some new foundation grants or spending more time talking to individual donors, right? Maybe this means we talk to our banker about a line of credit or some sort of bridge loan to help us through a time where our funding model may be changed a bit. These are different ways that we can think about and kind of prepare for that moment where we know we need to turn on our scenario plan. And the last thing, and I think this is really important, is that we also need to come up with some clear communication to our stakeholders and to our staff, right? So we need to understand, once we say yes, once we press play on our scenario, how is that going to be communicated to our staff, to our clients, to our funders? How do we approach that storytelling? And that's very important as well. Let's take a look at how the Mental Health Advocacy Network approached this final step. So the scenario plans were reviewed by the executive director, or they were created by the executive director and reviewed by the board of directors. The development director and the executive director then really had an increased focus on individual donors and foundations. They wanted to mitigate the potential risk we were planning for in losing some individual donors and potentially bolster some of the risky government funding by getting some increased foundation funding. The executive director and the treasurer also met with their banker to discuss a line of credit, a tool that they could use to help navigate a time where maybe there was less funding or a delay in reimbursements, for example. I really like number 4. The personnel committee on the board worked with an HR consultant to prepare for possible layoffs. So we know that in the second scenario that we walked through in detail, there would be staff reductions. There would be some staff that would stay on but have their time reduced, and there would be some positions that would be completely eliminated. And so having the HR consultant available to help make sure that these situations would be handled properly, that the staff would get severance, that they would do PTO payouts correctly, that was really important to the organization. And so they made an investment in that consultant to do that work. And then finally, they developed an internal and external communications plan. So they were prepared to communicate internally with their stakeholders about what plans they would undertake, and also externally to their clients, their donors, things of that nature. Okay, so that, in a nutshell, in a brief webinar format, is the scenario planning process that we approach with folks. So, I think that in a moment like this where a lot of things feel uncertain, that this can all feel like very big and overwhelming. But I think that going through the process, these different steps, asking these questions, having a really solid understanding of our financial position, all of these things are a really great exercise. They are making us into more nimble leaders, that we're able to envision more clearly how we might respond to a change or a challenge or an opportunity. So, this is one, I think, big piece of building sustainability in an organization. It's that ability to respond to changes, respond to challenges, respond to opportunities. And as I said before, if you're here today, if you're thinking about this in your organization, you're the right person to do this work. You understand the business model and the organization and the leaders and the moment, and you are here and you're doing it. So good work. Keep it up.
Sarah, I'm going to jump in with one question before we move to wrap up.
Excellent.
After your motivational speech. So someone asked a question about their like feeling very overwhelmed. They can like tell by the bank balances that like things are not great. And they are feeling really overwhelmed about like what they should do next. And like the cash flow template feels really overwhelming and all those sorts of things. Do you have any tips for them about how they can kind of move to action when they're feeling that kind of like overwhelming feelings that things are bad?
Yeah, that's really, well, I just want to acknowledge that's difficult, right? But I think it's good that you have a gut feeling and you want to develop a tool to help you kind of back that up with data and to maybe help you move forward. If I was reading your comment correctly, it maybe feels like the cash flow projection is a little overwhelming. But I am actually a huge proponent of the cash flow projection as like a tool if you're going to use one, because I think it helps us get all of the data out into a spreadsheet and to really be very aware of how income is coming into our organization and how income is going out. And if that feels overwhelming, maybe you start by doing a few months in the past, right? You can look at your income statement, you could look at your bank statements and kind of like do a quick like actuals in your cash flow projection to kind of see like what is the trend that is you're developing as you continue to look forward. But it's also a really great segue into office hours. So if this is a challenge that you're facing right now and you just need, like you're feeling overwhelmed, you need a thought partner to talk through or kind of like create something that can help you moving forward, office hours would be a great example. And if you don't happen to be available on one of these days, reach out to me, reach out to one of my colleagues, and we'll absolutely find time to chat. But I do want to mention before we sign off, just again, so a lot of content we explored in the last hour, a lot of different ideas and work potentially to do. But if you want to sit down and chat with someone from Propel, we do have these office hours coming up next week, August 12th, September 24th, and then also in November, we're taking the month of October off because we have the MCN conference and a few other conferences in the month of October. So if you want to chat about cash flow, about business models, if you want to talk about scenario planning, we're here for you. So sign up for a time to meet in person or virtually as well. Okay, thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with Propel. We have been working really hard to get this content updated for this moment, and so we're really glad that you joined us today and hope you'll stick around, for future webinars as well. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Teresa.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Thanks for taking this time to really just lay this all out. And thanks everyone for being so present with us in this. As again, all the resources shared today, along with this recording, will be sent out to you within a day. And then I encourage you to check out the links in the chat for those office hours. Also for upcoming trainings that we have. We provide free webinars like boards in times of uncertainty or transforming business models, and the next two coming up. We also have workshops where we dive a little deeper and have a little more time together. The one I want to highlight is next week. If you are a CEO or a board chair and want to come together to work on that important partnership, we have a training next week, August 13th, that we'd love to have you join with us. And then, as we heard, there's fundamentals of finance and fundamentals nonprofit budgeting, which was something that was mentioned as an important aspect too. That's coming up in September. So all that shared. I also just want to highlight that there is a link in the chat when we share the follow-up email of a survey for you to fill out to just help us continue to do this work well for you. And so share your feedback on how this webinar sat for you, and we will love to hear that. So Sarah's contact information will be shared in the follow-up email. Reach out to us. We're here for you in this time of uncertainty and time of change, and where we want to support you. So reach out as needed, and we hope you have a good rest of your day.
Bye everyone. Thank you.